He stood before her, rigid in indignation, pointing at the empty first-class seat beside him. "I'm not sitting next to her," he barked, voice sharp enough to hush the murmurs in the cabin. Zara Pierce, in her camouflage uniform freshly pressed and ribbons shining subtly on her chest, remained motionless. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She didn't frown. Just looked at him, expression unreadable. "She looks like she's about to bark orders," the man added, with a snort meant to amuse the crowd around him. A few chuckled nervously. Most looked away. The flight attendant's face tightened. "Sir, she has the same right to be here as you. She's on the manifest." "Then move her," he growled. Pierce calmly unbuckled her belt. She hadn't even removed her rucksack. Her boots were still damp from the rain in Atlanta. Without a word, she stood, nodded at the attendant, and walked down the aisle toward economy. She didn't slam anything. Didn't curse. Didn't even sigh. One passenger muttered, "Unbelievable," under her breath. Another whispered, "Isn't she military?" A teenager on the opposite side pulled out their phone. The camera followed her quiet walk of refusal, the soldier being pushed from her seat by a man who couldn't stomach her presence. As Pierce took the cramped seat by the galley, folding her legs the best she could, a boy across from her peeked through the gap in the seat. "Are you a real soldier?" he asked softly. She nodded once. "Yes, I am." The boy smiled. "Cool." Zara smiled back. Her first one that day. 2 rows up, Raymond Cartwright huffed into his seat. He adjusted his overpriced tie, sipped his complimentary champagne, and mumbled about respect being lost in this generation. He didn't realize the man beside him was quietly typing a post about the entire interaction. He didn't know the woman he'd dismissed had spent 3 tours as a combat medic, pulled men twice his size from burning vehicles, and patched up soldiers while bullets zipped overhead. He didn't care. To him, she didn't look like a hero. She looked like an inconvenience. The plane took off. The hum of the engines was nothing compared to the silence brewing across social media. Before wheels left the tarmac, 3 passengers had posted photos and a brief clip. By the time the aircraft hit cruising altitude, the incident had a hashtag. Pierce leaned her head back and closed her eyes. The seat was too small. Her knees ached. She hadn't expected first class, just appreciated the gesture when the gate agent smiled and offered it. She didn't demand anything. Didn't feel entitled. But what she wouldn't do, what she couldn't do, was argue with a man like that on a plane full of onlookers who were just waiting to see what she would do wrong. Because it always came down to her reaction, not the action itself. She could feel the weight of every black woman who wore a uniform before her, every one who walked into a room and was asked if she was with the help or some kind of secretary. The real insult wasn't the seat. It was the assumption that her presence was a threat, a disruption, a statement. She said nothing. Her silence was her resistance. Her refusal to entertain ignorance. A few hours later, the plane landed. Passengers disembarked. Cartwright walked ahead, never glancing back. Zara waited her turn, let the others pass. When she reached the door, the flight attendant from earlier caught her sleeve gently. "I'm so sorry, Sergeant," she said. "We couldn't make him move. Airline policy and—" Zara held up a hand. "It's fine." But it wasn't. It hadn't been fine for a long time. Later that evening, she sat in her apartment, dog tags still around her neck, boots still by the door, scrolling through her phone. Her face appeared on her feed, cell phone footage from 3 rows behind. The caption read, "Man refuses to sit beside black female soldier in first class." Her response? "Classy AF." Zara's mouth curled into a smirk. She clicked like. The comments were a flood of support. "She handled that with more grace than I could have." "Disgusting behavior." "Glad someone filmed it." "Who is she?" "Someone find her." One comment stood out. "Isn't this ZP from the military comedy tour videos?" And suddenly, she wasn't just a disrespected soldier. She was a woman people recognized. Her inbox exploded within hours. Influencers reposted. Celebrities tweeted. Veterans from every branch sent messages of solidarity. Her old captain emailed her a single line. I see you still handle cowards like a general. Zara didn't feel vindicated. Not yet. The clip didn't show the weight in her chest, the burning behind her eyes, or the muscle memory of holding back every sharp word she could have said. But it sparked something. Not rage. Purpose. This wasn't the first time she'd been dismissed. It wouldn't be the last. But maybe, just maybe, this time she could turn it into something that mattered. As she closed her phone, a voice message buzzed in. Her agent. You seeing this? We've got a window. Everyone wants to hear your side. If we move fast, this story doesn't die, it evolves. She opened her laptop. She didn't have to craft a story. She just had to tell the truth. And this time, the truth wasn't going to sit quietly in economy. By the next morning, Zara's name wasn't just trending, it was everywhere. News outlets ran segments about the poised soldier with a viral moment. Commentators debated the incident. Some called it a reflection of how far society still had to go. Others downplayed it as just a misunderstanding. But the public had made up its mind. They had seen a woman wronged and dignified, and they weren't going to let it slide. Zara watched from the sidelines, not jumping in. She wasn't sure if she wanted to become the center of another online news cycle. She had seen it happen to others. One moment of injustice turns into a week of attention, then silence. But this wasn't fading. This was growing. Her comedy clips resurfaced, and the comment sections flooded with admiration. You were hilarious in that VA clinic bit. Didn't know you served and did stand-up. You're incredible. You always keep it classy. Much respect. Her inbox now overflowed with show invite, bookings, press requests, military podcasts. Even a late-night host wanted her as a guest. She let her agent sort it out. Zara wasn't in it for fame, she just wanted to speak. But she knew the difference between being heard and being used. She wouldn't be a token in someone's performative diversity segment. She agreed to do one thing, a tape special, her way. A live stand-up set in D.C., in front of veterans, civilians, and everyone who had ever been dismissed because of how they looked, what they wore, or the way they carried themselves. She didn't write a new routine. She sharpened what she already had. Because this story wasn't just about a seat. It was about years of microaggressions, about training harder than the men beside her, and still being told to smile more. It was about deploying to combat zones and returning to airports where people asked if she was a dependent instead of a soldier. It was about being both invisible and hypervisible, ignored and scrutinized, all at once. When the night of the performance came, the theater buzzed. Veterans in dress uniforms, families, young kids with future soldier t-shirts, reporters in the back, unsure if they were covering comedy or a cultural reckoning. Zara stepped onto the stage in jeans and boots, mic in hand, dog tags swinging gently against her shirt. Ever been kicked out of a seat you didn't ask for? She opened. No? Just me? Cool. Laughter. Applause. Not because it was funny, but because it was honest. She told the story, not bitterly, but with timing, pauses, dry wit. He said I looked like I was about to bark orders. Sir, if I bark, it's because you're acting like a squirrel. She moved from the absurdity of that flight into the everyday weight of wearing the uniform, of being mimed and then ignored, of being asked where her husband served, of being told, you don't look like military. What does military look like? She asked the crowd. Does it look like him? She pointed to a clean-cut man in the front row who nearly spilled his drink laughing. He's got the haircut, but I bet I can carry more ammo. Roars of laughter. Then silence as she paused. I fought for this country. I carried brothers and sisters out of fire. And you know the scariest moment I've had? Not war. Not gunfire. Not losing comms. It was sitting in first class, watching a man decide that everything I'd done, every medal, every mission, meant nothing because of the skin I wear and the body I live in. The silence now was weighty. But you know what? That silence he wanted. He didn't get it. Because now y'all won't shut up. Thunderous applause. And you know what the punchline is? He still thinks he won that day. Laughter again, this time sharper. More pointed. She wrapped the set with a story of resilience, about the time she was denied entry to a military gala because the bouncer didn't believe her ID. She ended it with her classic callback. Funny, isn't it? I serve, I sacrifice, and y'all still treat me like I'm crashing the party. Standing ovation. Backstage, her agent handed her a sealed envelope. Someone left this. Said not to make a big deal. She opened it. Inside, a short note. You made me see myself, and I didn't like what I saw. Thank you for not turning it into war. You won with peace. R.C. There was no name, just initials. But she didn't need a full name. Raymond Cartwright had sat through her entire show. In silence. Somewhere in that crowd, anonymous and unrecognized. He had heard every word. Every joke. Every truth. And he had listened. Zara didn't feel vindicated. She felt grounded. She'd carried anger for years, compressed into jokes, turned into art. But this was different. This wasn't revenge. This was transformation. She folded the note carefully, tucked it in her rucksack. Not as a trophy. As a reminder. Because the legacy she was building wasn't just for laugh. It was for the little girl watching from the crowd who now believed she could wear a uniform and a microphone. For the soldier on deployment who didn't look like the poster but still bore the weight of the mission. For the man who learned, quietly, humbly, that leadership sometimes means sitting in discomfort and listening to someone you once refused to share space with. Zara didn't post about the note. She didn't expose him. She didn't need to. Because real accountability doesn't come from hashtags. It comes from change. And in that moment, she saw it. Not in applause. Not in followers. But in the invisible shift of a single mind, and the quiet humility of a man who finally chose to understand. 3 days after the show, Zara was back in uniform, standing at attention during a medal pinning ceremony for another soldier. Cameras flashed, but none were on her. She preferred it that way. For all the public attention, she still found comfort in structure, chain of command, and shared duty. But there was a subtle change. Officers addressed her with a new tone, respect not just for rank, but for voice. Her story had added a different weight to her presence. She wasn't just the woman who endured discrimination with dignity. She was the one who flipped the script without ever raising her voice. The Department of Defense quietly circulated a memo about public perception and inclusion. While the language was vague, corporate, bureaucratic, it was clear something had shifted. She heard whispers in the break room. Commands looking at diversity training again. Did you hear what Sergeant Brooks pulled off last week? She wasn't looking to be the face of reform, but it was happening anyway. And not all of it was welcomed. One superior pulled her aside, stiff and awkward, and said, "Impressive showmanship, Sergeant. Just don't let entertainment dilute discipline." She looked him dead in the eye. "Sir, it's not entertainment if it reflects truth." That shut him up. Outside the base, her story sparked a chain reaction. Military women of color started sharing their own moments, being mistaken for janitors, ignored at briefings, left out of decisions despite higher rank. Zara's DMs were full of quiet thank yous. One from a woman in Kuwait read, "I didn't even realize I'd been shrinking until I saw you stand tall." Another message came from a high school student in Georgia. "My teacher played your video in class. I didn't know we were allowed to fight back like that, without violence." Zara never replied with more than a few words, but she read every one. It reminded her why she never lashed out at that man on the flight. Why she used silence to shame him and not anger. Her restraint had not been weakness. It had been strategy. Her mother always told her, "You don't need to raise your voice if you own the room." But in the age of virality, people wanted more. Her agent called her with an offer. Netflix wanted a follow-up special. Not comedy. A documentary. They'd shoot it over 6 months, blend her stand-up sets with interviews and behind-the-scenes footage. It'll be your legacy piece, her agent said. Think Chappelle meets 13th, but from a woman's lens. Powerful, personal. You lead the narrative. Zara didn't jump at it. Legacy wasn't something you chase. It's something others see in you when you're busy doing the work. She agreed, but with conditions. Creative control, final cut approval, and that it wouldn't become a sob story. If I'm telling this, she said, it ends with laughter. Not pity. Filming began. They captured her training troops, visiting family, performing, mentoring young soldiers. But the most powerful moments were offstage. Like when a white Vietnam veteran walked up to her after a show in Texas, eyes full of tears, and said, I grew up believing folks like you couldn't do what I did. I was wrong. I'm glad you proved me wrong. Or the day she returned to the very airport where the incident happened. She walked through security, first-class ticket in hand, wearing civilian clothes. No one said anything. No one challenged her. But she saw them looking. Curious. Cautious. One airline employee whispered, Are you her? She just smiled. Sometimes. They didn't know whether to offer an upgrade or apologize. She just kept walking. By the 5th month, the documentary team had footage from 20 cities. Soldiers, civilians, teachers, college students. A theme had emerged. Representation wasn't just about being seen, it was about being believed. Her story wasn't unique, it had just been heard. That made all the difference. Then came the letter. A handwritten note, forwarded by her agent. No return address. You made me see past my own fear. My father was a colonel. He believed in rules, not feelings. I carried that into adulthood. When I saw you in that seat, I saw challenge. I saw disorder. But you showed me dignity. I see that now. I'm sorry for what I did and grateful for what you did next. You made me laugh at myself, without cruelty. That's leadership. R.C. Zara read it twice. It was longer than the first note, more vulnerable. No one needed to tell her who R.C. was. She could hear the tremble in the words, the weight behind the apology. It wasn't performative. It wasn't PR. It was personal. And that mattered. She didn't respond. Not because she wasn't moved, but because some acknowledgments deserve to float quietly between two people and nowhere else. As production wrapped, she gave one final interview for the documentary. The producer asked, "What do you hope people take from your story?" She paused. "That your silence is powerful," she said. "You don't have to yell to be heard. And you don't need revenge to win. You just need to keep walking. Keep showing up. And when someone tries to deny you space, take it anyway. Gracefully. Proudly. Loudly if you must. But never apologetically." The documentary dropped 2 weeks later. It didn't just trend. It shifted things. Recruitment offices reported a spike in inquiries from women of color. Comedy clubs saw more diverse open mic sign-up. Schools assigned the film as required viewing in history and civics classes. The Army quietly added Zara's story to its leadership training modules under a section titled Command Presence Through Cultural Competency. She didn't care about awards or reviews. What she cared about was seeing a 12-year-old girl saluting her at a veterans event and saying, "I want to do what you did." All of it. Zara knelt down and said, "Then promise me this, don't let anyone tell you where you don't belong." The girl nodded. In that moment, Zara realized something profound. The seat she had taken that day on the plane wasn't just a seat. It was a symbol. And she hadn't just occupied it. She had claimed it. For everyone who had been told they didn't fit the image. She didn't just rewrite the story. She reshaped the narrative. Not through force. Not through rage. But with poise, purpose, and punchlines that hit harder than any insult ever could. The world didn't forget. Instead, it evolved. Zara's name kept appearing, not just in comedy circles or military forums, but in university curricula, TED Talks, even corporate workshop. Her clip was analyzed in diversity training, dissected in ethics classes, quoted in leadership panels. She became a living case study in how to respond to prejudice with power, to turn a dehumanizing moment into a platform for human growth. Her humor wasn't just entertainment anymore, it was curriculum, insight, and instruction. The woman who once had to sit politely while being dismissed now found herself advising high-ranking officers, CEOs, and policymakers on inclusion strategy and interpersonal integrity. She didn't ask for the role, but she wore it with the same poise she showed on the flight. She never chased the spotlight, but she no longer dodged it either. When invited to speak at the Pentagon's annual leadership symposium, she didn't hesitate. She opened with a joke about the uniform not coming with an invisibility cloak, even though people used to act like it did. The audience laughed, but the message was clear. "You want to lead the future force?" she told them. "Start by seeing every soldier for who they are, beyond bias, beyond history. See them as people who chose to serve, not stereotypes to be managed." She paused and added, "And never assume silence means submission. Some of us are just saving our words for the microphone." The room stood up. Not out of obligation, but because they felt the shift. This wasn't a lecture. This was a redefinition. Her influence began touching corners of culture no one expected. A fashion brand used her quote, "Take the seat anyway," as the centerpiece of their women's campaign. A graffiti muralist painted her silhouette on a military jet, with her laughing into a mic, captioned, "Permission not needed." And yet, she remained grounded. Still trained recruits, still ran drills, still got up at dawn like every other soldier. Fame hadn't softened her edge, it had sharpened her purpose. She wasn't chasing the next viral moment. She was focused on ensuring others wouldn't need to go viral just to be validated. One afternoon, she was invited to a high school where a student protest had erupted after a teacher dismissed a young black girl's interest in ROTC. The girl had been told, "It's probably not for you." That girl responded by organizing a walkout, and then writing to Zara. Her email was short, "They told me I didn't belong. But then I remembered your story." Zara showed up without warning. She addressed the whole student body, but kept her gaze fixed on the girl. She didn't talk about politics, race, or even military service. She talked about visibility, about how systems don't change because of policies. They change because of people who refuse to sit down when told to. Afterward, she gave the girl her unit patch and said, "Hold this until you earn your own." The media didn't pick it up. There were no cameras, no hashtags. But that moment mattered more than any standing ovation. Change wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was whispered into the hands of someone brave enough to carry it forward. Meanwhile, the man from the flight, Robert Carlin, lived a quieter story. His handwritten apology had marked the beginning, but not the end, of his transformation. After watching her documentary, he started attending local events about racial equity and veteran affairs. Not as a speaker, just as a listener. At one panel, someone recognized him, not for being the man from the plane, but for being the guy who asked the hard, honest questions without pretending he already knew the answers. One afternoon, he emailed her agent and requested no publicity, no photo op. He just wanted to sit in the back of one of her stand-up shows. Not to be seen, just to understand. He did. And she noticed. She didn't call him out or humiliate him. Instead, she paused in the middle of her set and told a new story. "There was this guy once. Thought my uniform made me a threat to his peace and quiet. Thought leadership had a look, a color, a tone. But I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I just took my seat. And let the world decide who belonged where." The room applauded, some even stood. But Zara glanced toward the shadows at the back of the room. She didn't need to point. The message had landed. After the show, Carlin left quietly. No words. Just a small envelope placed on the greenroom table. Inside was a card. "You didn't just sit. You stood up, for both of us. I may never deserve your forgiveness, but I've earned my own clarity. Thank you. Zara didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply folded the card, placed it inside her jacket pocket, and exhaled. Growth, she realized, isn't about grand gestures. It's about quiet acknowledgments, internal reckonings, and the humility to say, I was wrong, even when no one demands it. Her shows evolve. Less about roasting injustice, more about empowering those who thought they had no voice. She became more than a comedian or a soldier. She became a mirror reflecting society's discomfort and progress, pain and potential, all in one sharp, funny, unforgettable package. And when younger soldiers asked her how to make a difference, she told them, be ready. Not for applause, but for impact. One seat, one story, one shift at a time. She never used the flight story again in her set. It had done its work. Now, she focused on what came after. Because the real legacy wasn't the moment of discrimination. It was the millions of micro-transformations sparked by her response. By now, Zara had become a household name in communities that rarely intersected: military, entertainment, education, activism. But she didn't care about being famous. She cared about being useful. And her platform gave her access to something far more valuable than status: influence over hearts and minds. She once said, you can't legislate empathy, but you can model it. And that's exactly what she did. Not just by taking her seat, but by helping others find theirs, and sit proudly. The requests kept coming. Colleges, corporate retreats, leadership summits. Zara never sought out this level of attention, but she understood its purpose. Every platform was a megaphone for something bigger than her. She didn't use her stage time to chase fame. She used it to advocate. Every story, every punchline, every pause was crafted to hit harder than a mere laugh. Because what she was doing now, this wasn't just comedy. It was cultural repair. She stood in front of Wall Street executives one afternoon, not in uniform, not with a script, just herself. Some of you wouldn't hire someone like me. Not because of my resume, but because of my hair, or my tone, or because I remind you of a woman who once made you feel small, she said. But you know what's funny? You'd take a bullet for your brand but wouldn't take a second to question your bias. That's the real corporate comedy. Laughter rolled across the room. Nervous at first, then open. Something shifted. She wasn't begging them to change. She was showing them what it looked like to lead with both spine and soul. Her presence was a contradiction to every excuse. They couldn't say they didn't know. She was living proof. A black woman, a soldier, a comic, and a cultural mirror all in one. What started as a man's refusal to sit beside her became an entire movement about recognizing who we've been conditioned not to see. More importantly, the younger generation took notice. Teenagers recreated her viral set on TikTok. ROTC groups invited her to speak. But it wasn't just black girls who saw themselves in her anymore. It was anyone who'd been sidelined, underestimated, misjudged, dismissed. Her story transcended race, gender, and rank. It became about voice, and who gets to use theirs. A publishing house approached her for a memoir. She declined at first. She didn't want her life on a shelf. She wanted it in motion. But after some thought, she agreed, with one condition: it had to include the stories of others who had stood up after being pushed down. Veterans, janitors, teachers, flight attendants, nurses, ordinary people who had turned disrespect into purpose. She titled it Take the Seat Anyway. The book hit bestseller lists in its first week. Not because of hype, but because the world was hungry for something real, something that didn't gloss over pain or skip to the redemption arc, something that acknowledged the messy middle, the uncomfortable silence before the clapback, the quiet grit before the transformation. Meanwhile, Robert Carlin began volunteering at a local veterans center. Not because anyone told him to. Not because he was trying to atone. But because he realized how little he had understood about the people he once judged. He didn't talk much about the flight. If someone brought it up, he just said, That day gave me new eyes. His friends noticed. The gruff exterior softened. He stopped telling those off-color jokes he once thought were harmless. He started mentoring young professionals on humility in leadership, how authority isn't a license to dismiss, but a responsibility to uplift. In one session, a young intern asked him what triggered the change. "I was blind," he said. "And then someone sat next to me and showed me a mirror." He wrote Zara a second note. Not a thank you this time, but a question. "How do I help others like me unlearn what we were taught?" She replied with one sentence: "Start by listening without defense." It wasn't the type of answer that made headlines, but it was the one that stuck with him. He began hosting listening circles for veterans of all backgrounds, inviting them to share stories of service, identity, and isolation. No recording, no judgment, just space. And over time, walls fell. Zara heard about it quietly. She never showed up, never needed to. His actions spoke louder than an apology ever could. Years passed. The flight incident faded from the spotlight, but its ripple effects remained. A new airline policy was adopted mandating cultural sensitivity training for staff and offering priority seating to active service members in uniform, regardless of who felt uncomfortable. Several airlines followed suit. The policy was informally dubbed Zara's Rule across the industry. When asked about it in interviews, she always smiled and said, "It's not about me. It's about all of us being seen." In one of her final televised specials, she ended her set not with a joke, but a moment of silence. She looked into the camera and said, "If you've ever been told you're too loud, too bold, too much, know that it's only because your presence threatens the comfort of small minds. Don't shrink to fit their narrative. Take the seat, use your voice, and leave a mark they can't erase." The crowd didn't just clap, they stood. It wasn't entertainment anymore. It was transformation wrapped in timing. Her legacy wasn't just a viral clip or a best-selling book. It was the countless people who stopped making assumptions based on uniforms or accents or skin tone. It was the school districts that revised curriculum to include modern stories of resilience. It was the CEO who replaced quarterly diversity reports with monthly listening sessions. It was the soldier in line at the coffee shop who got a salute instead of a side-eye. It was the change you couldn't measure, but could feel. When a journalist once asked her what she was most proud of, she didn't mention her rank, her comedy specials, or the policy changes. She said, "I'm proud that I didn't react when I could have. I responded when it mattered." That distinction, the difference between reacting in anger and responding with purpose, became a leadership model. Her story was required reading at multiple military academies and civil service institutions. But none of it changed who she was at her core. Zara still wore her boots like armor, still laughed with her entire chest, still taught her ments that empathy is louder than ego. She still answered every message from a young person saying, "They told me I don't belong." And she always responded the same way. "You do. And don't let them forget it." Because the seat she fought for wasn't just on a plane. It was at the table of power, the stage of influence, the center of culture. And now, because she took it, others knew they could too. The moment Robert Carlin first walked into the comedy club, anonymously, was one he would never forget. He had never seen Zara perform live, only clips online, and the image of the woman who had flipped his world upside down was still vivid in his mind. The place was packed, buzzing with energy. The air smelled of coffee and anticipation. He found a seat near the back, hoping to blend in. He was there not as the old businessman who had refused to share a seat, but as a man seeking understanding, maybe even redemption. Zara took the stage with her usual confidence, her smile disarming, her presence commanding. She didn't waste time with fluff. Her set was sharp, witty, loaded with personal anecdotes that exposed prejudice and resilience in equal measure. She talked about the day on the plane, but not with bitterness. She used humor to dismantle ignorance, weaving her story into a broader narrative about respect, equality, and strength. The audience laughed, cheered, and sometimes fell silent, absorbing the gravity beneath the jokes. Robert's heart pounded as he realized he was hearing the story from her perspective, not the distorted version he had imagined. She wasn't just the soldier or the comedian, she was a human being with depth, pain, and extraordinary courage. He felt the weight of his past arrogance crushing him silently. After the show, the crowd surged forward for autographs and selfies, but Robert waited patiently, clutching a small, neatly folded note. When the crowd thinned, he approached her cautiously, his voice low and hesitant. "I'm Robert," he said. "I was on that flight." His eyes met hers, searching for forgiveness or, at the very least, acknowledgement. "I want to apologize. Not just for what I said or did, but for everything I didn't see." Zara studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "That took courage," she replied softly. "What made you come tonight?" He sighed. "I couldn't stop thinking about how wrong I was. How blind I'd been. I wanted to understand what I missed, and maybe find a way to change." She smiled gently. "That's the first step." He handed her the note. It read, "Thank you for teaching me to listen without defense. You changed how I see the world." She tucked it into her jacket pocket and said, "It's never too late to be better." Word of their meeting spread quickly, and it sparked a conversation that rippled through social media, news outlets, and community forums. The story of the man who had publicly refused to sit beside a black female soldier, and then sought her forgiveness in the most personal way, became a powerful lesson in humility and growth. This wasn't about public shaming anymore, it was about accountability and redemption. Robert's journey inspired others to confront their own prejudices, leading to a grassroots movement encouraging honest dialogue across racial and generational divide. Zara used this momentum to launch a nationwide initiative, partnering with veteran organizations and comedy circuits to create safe spaces where stories of discrimination and resilience could be shared openly. The goal was not to pit one group against another, but to foster empathy and understanding through the power of narrative. She emphasized that real change required more than just acknowledgement. It demanded active participation, listening, learning, and standing up for those who still faced injustice silently. Through workshops, speaking engagements, and online campaigns, she championed diversity and inclusion as indispensable elements of leadership and community. Her own experiences became case studies in military and corporate training programs, highlighting how unconscious bias affects decisions and relationships at every level. The initiative also encouraged mentorship, connecting young people from marginalized backgrounds with leaders who could guide and support their growth. Zara's story resonated widely because it embodied transformation. It showed that resilience was not just surviving hardship, but turning it into a catalyst for positive change. Her ability to blend humor with profound insight made difficult conversations accessible and impactful. Meanwhile, Robert continued his path quietly but earnestly. He took on mentorship roles, focusing on helping others recognize their blind spots and embrace empathy. He advocated for policies that promoted equality within his company and community, always crediting the lessons he learned from Zara's example. Their unlikely connection challenged the notion that change was impossible late in life or beyond certain social circles. It proved that growth and forgiveness were powerful tools for healing divisions. The public narrative shifted from confrontation to collaboration. People began to see beyond stereotypes and assumptions, recognizing shared humanity instead of difference. The dialogue expanded to include voices that had long been marginalized, creating a richer, more inclusive cultural landscape. Zara often reflected on how a single act of courage, refusing to be silenced and choosing to respond with grace, had set off this chain reaction. She knew the fight against prejudice was ongoing, but this moment had marked a turning point. Her message remained clear. No one should ever be denied dignity or respect because of who they are or what they wear. Every seat at the table, every space in society, belonged to everyone equally. The ripple effect touched families, workplaces, schools, and government. Initiatives inspired by her story promoted policy reforms, diversity training, and community outreach programs nationwide. Young people found new role models in her, learning that strength came in many forms, through courage, humor, leadership, and vulnerability. In the end, what began as a tense, uncomfortable moment on a plane transformed into a movement that challenged and changed societal attitude. It was a testament to the power of resilience, empathy, and the willingness to listen and grow. Zara and Robert's story became a blueprint for healing and unity, showing that when people choose to confront prejudice with understanding rather than anger, the impossible becomes possible. This narrative didn't just capture headlines, it changed hearts and minds. One story, one laugh, one seat taken at a time. The aftermath of that night at the comedy club was profound, not only for Robert and Zara but for a society grappling with deep-rooted issues of prejudice and inequality. The viral clip of Zara's routine and the story of Robert's unexpected apology sparked a cultural shift, but real transformation required sustained effort beyond a single event or viral moment. Zara took this responsibility seriously. She expanded her platform, dedicating herself to mentorship programs aimed at empowering young people, especially those from marginalized communities. She understood that true equality was not just about breaking barriers for herself but ensuring others could rise without facing the same obstacles. Her military background gave her leadership credibility, and her sharp wit made her a natural advocate. She connected with veterans, community leaders, educators, and corporate executives to create spaces where honest conversations about discrimination could occur without fear or judgment. Her approach was clear. Resilience is more than endurance, it is the capacity to transform pain into purpose. She encouraged young people to tell their own stories, use their voices, and demand inclusion. By sharing her journey from soldier to comedian to activist, she became a living example of growth and leadership born from adversity. Meanwhile, Robert faced his own reckoning. He stepped down from his executive position, recognizing that his old-school attitudes were incompatible with the inclusive culture the future demanded. But stepping aside was only part of his redemption. He launched a foundation focused on anti-discrimination training and leadership development, funding scholarships for minority students, and supporting programs that nurtured empathy and equality. Through his foundation, he worked closely with Zara's initiatives, reinforcing a message that change must be embraced at every level, from individual actions to institutional policies. The two became unlikely partners in advocacy, proving that personal transformation and public leadership often walk hand in hand. Robert's willingness to confront his biases and actively promote inclusion inspired many in his generation to reflect and change. Zara's ongoing work ensured that the conversation continued, evolving from reactive outrage to proactive education. Together, they championed the power of accountability and forgiveness. They showed that admitting mistakes publicly and working to make amends was a strength, not a weakness. This model resonated widely, reducing polarization and fostering collaboration across racial and social lines. Their story was integrated into school curricula, corporate workshops, and military training programs, emphasizing the importance of empathy, diversity, and inclusion as foundational to effective leadership. They promoted mentorship as a crucial tool for growth, recognizing that passing knowledge and wisdom to the next generation was essential for lasting change. Zara's comedy tours became more than entertainment. They were educational experiences that blended humor with hard truths, inspiring audiences to challenge prejudice and embrace resilience. Her storytelling dismantled stereotypes and opened minds, creating a ripple effect of cultural empathy. Robert's Foundation organized annual summits that brought together activists, business leaders, veterans, educators, and youth advocates to share strategies for combating discrimination and promoting equality. These gatherings fostered a community of practice dedicated to continuous learning and cultural shift. Their collaboration also influenced media narrative. Journalists and content creators began focusing on stories of redemption and growth, moving beyond conflict-driven headlines to highlight examples of leadership and transformation. This shift helped normalize discussions about systemic bias and the human capacity for change. In their personal lives, both Zara and Robert grew significantly. Zara found healing through her advocacy, turning past pain into a legacy of empowerment. Robert discovered a renewed sense of purpose, dedicated to repairing the harm caused by ignorance and inspiring others to do the same. They remained united by a shared conviction: equality is not a gift to be granted but a right to be claimed and defended by all. Their journey underscored the critical role each person plays in shaping a just society. Years later, Zara's story continued to inspire new generations. Her resilience and humor reminded people that even in the face of discrimination, strength and dignity could prevail. Robert's transformation was a testament to the power of humility and accountability. The legacy they built together transcended their initial conflict. It became a beacon for those striving to create inclusive communities where diversity was celebrated and every individual's humanity was recognized. Their story was a powerful reminder that progress is possible when courage meets compassion and when voices long silenced are finally heard. It proved that real change comes not from shame or anger, but from understanding, empathy, and the shared commitment to a better future. Through leadership, mentorship, advocacy, and relentless resilience, they changed the narrative. What started with a refused seat ended with an entire nation reconsidering who deserved to be seen and heard. This transformation was not just social but deeply personal, proving that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can spark movements that redefine history. Theirs was a story about the enduring strength of the human spirit to grow, forgive, and unite in pursuit of equality.